Someone asked your person to forget you and get married. Their response changed everything. My beloved child, something quietly shifted today, and if you leave before the final moments of this message, you may never understand why one unexpected conversation changed the direction of two hearts forever. There are moments in life that never appear on calendars. No announcement. No warning. Just a few ordinary words spoken in an ordinary room. And yet those words become the turning point of an entire future. Today was one of those moments. Someone sat across from the person who has been occupying your thoughts. Their voice sounded calm, almost caring, but hidden beneath every sentence was a challenge. They leaned in and said, "It's time to let go. Forget that person. Move on. There are better choices waiting. Think about marriage. Think about a different life." For a brief second, silence filled the space. Not the silence of uncertainty, but the silence that comes before an answer powerful enough to surprise everyone listening. Stay a little longer. This is only the beginning. The people around them expected hesitation. They believed your memory had become distant. They assumed time had erased every emotion that once seemed impossible to forget. After all, the world often teaches people that feelings fade, that waiting is foolish, and that the easiest path is always the safest one. But something unexpected happened. Instead of agreeing, your person looked away for a moment, as though searching through memories that nobody else in that room could see. They remembered moments that seemed too small to matter back then. A conversation. A smile that lasted only seconds. An unexpected feeling of peace that arrived without explanation. Strange how the smallest memories often become the strongest proof when the heart is tested. Have you ever wondered why certain people remain impossible to replace, even when life offers endless distractions? That question echoed inside them. The voice urging them to move on continued speaking. Every argument sounded logical. Every reason sounded practical. Everything pointed toward choosing comfort instead of uncertainty. Yet the heart rarely follows the shortest road. It follows the deepest truth. And suddenly, everything changed. Not because someone convinced them. Not because a miracle appeared. But because they finally heard their own inner voice louder than everyone else's opinions. That inner voice whispered something they had been trying to ignore for far too long. You don't truly want another future, you simply want peace with the one your heart still remembers. The room grew quiet again. No dramatic scene. No raised voices. Just a decision beginning to take shape beneath the surface. Decisions like these are almost invisible while they happen, but later people look back and realize that everything changed in those silent seconds. Wait before you leave, because the next piece completes what you're beginning to see. The person speaking to them couldn't understand the expression forming on your person's face. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't confusion. It looked more like clarity finally arriving after a long season of emotional noise. Sometimes life becomes so crowded with advice that people forget to ask themselves one simple question. What do I actually feel when nobody else is speaking? That question can transform everything. As those thoughts settled into their heart, they realized something remarkable. They weren't holding on to you because they feared being alone. They weren't remembering you because of habit. They were remembering you because every attempt to imagine a future without you somehow felt incomplete. Not perfect. Not guaranteed. Simply incomplete. That realization surprised even them. Perhaps the greatest turning points never begin with loud celebrations. They begin with quiet honesty. Before anyone could interrupt, they finally spoke. Their words were calm, almost gentle. I can't promise what tomorrow looks like. I can't explain everything I'm feeling. But I won't erase someone from my heart just because the world tells me it's more convenient. No one expected that answer. The atmosphere shifted. The advice they had been given moments earlier suddenly lost its power. Because truth has a strange way of standing taller than pressure. And what happened immediately after those words became the beginning of a story that nobody in that room saw coming. You might miss the turning point if you stop here. The next chapter reveals why their unexpected response left everyone completely speechless. A quiet realization began to spread through the room, not because anyone had won an argument, but because everyone sensed they had just witnessed something that couldn't be explained by logic alone. The conversation was supposed to end with a simple decision. Instead, it opened a door that nobody expected. Stay with this moment. The next few minutes reveal why one honest response carried more weight than 1,000 carefully prepared opinions. The person who had encouraged your person to forget you sat there, searching for another reason, another explanation, another persuasive sentence. They believed one final attempt would change everything. What if you're waiting for something that never happens? They asked softly. Wouldn't it be wiser to begin a new chapter now? The question lingered in the air. Your person didn't answer immediately. Instead, they smiled, a quiet smile that carried neither pride nor sadness. It was the smile of someone who had finally stopped fighting their own heart. Sometimes clarity doesn't arrive with excitement. Sometimes it arrives with peace. Then they replied. I've spent enough time listening to everyone else. Today, I decided to listen to myself. Those words landed differently than anyone expected. Because confidence spoken without anger often carries the greatest strength. No one interrupted. No one laughed. Even those who disagreed felt something shift inside them. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about witnessing someone choose authenticity over pressure. Think about this for a moment. How many people make life-changing decisions simply because they're afraid of disappointing others? And how many quietly regret those choices years later? Your person realized they didn't want to become one of those stories. They weren't chasing a fantasy. They weren't refusing change. They were simply refusing to betray what they genuinely felt. Wait until the next revelation, because this is where the conversation became impossible to forget. The room grew still again. One family member finally asked the question everyone had been thinking. So, if you aren't moving on, what exactly are you waiting for? Your person looked toward the window before answering, almost as if searching beyond the horizon. I'm not waiting for perfection, they said. I'm waiting for truth to unfold naturally. Some connections deserve patience instead of panic. Those words surprised even the oldest person in the room. Patience. Not pressure. Hope. Not haste. It was a perspective few expected to hear. At that very moment, the energy of the conversation changed completely. The discussion was no longer about forgetting someone. It became about understanding what truly matters when life places difficult choices in front of us. If this message resonates with you, share your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy stories that explore destiny, personal growth, and meaningful connections, consider subscribing so you won't miss the next chapter. But don't go anywhere yet. The most surprising moment hadn't even happened. As everyone prepared to move on, someone quietly spoke words that no one in the room had anticipated. "You've changed," they whispered. Not because your person had become louder. Not because they had become stubborn. But because they had become certain. There is a remarkable difference between chasing someone and honoring what your heart sincerely knows. That certainty could not be argued away. The conversation slowly came to an end, yet something invisible had already begun. Every person who entered that room believing your chapter was over left with a completely different question in their mind. What if this connection was never meant to be forgotten? And far away, without realizing why, you may have felt an unusual sense of calm, as though an unseen chapter had quietly turned in your favor. Before this story reaches its greatest turning point, one final conversation will take place, one that reveals a truth your person has never spoken aloud before. And when those words are finally revealed, everything that seemed uncertain will begin to make sense. Stay a little longer, because the next part changes the entire picture. A single sentence can remain hidden inside the heart for months, sometimes even years. Yet when the right moment finally arrives, that one sentence carries enough power to reshape every conversation that follows. What happened next wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was unforgettable. Before you move on, stay through this part, because the next revelation explains why your person's response continued echoing long after everyone had gone home. The room had nearly emptied. Conversations drifted into other topics. Cups were cleared from the table. Chairs quietly moved back into place. To anyone passing by, it looked like an ordinary evening coming to an end. But your person remained where they were. Not because they had more to say. Because they had one thought they could no longer keep hidden. An older relative, who had listened silently through the entire discussion, walked over and sat beside them. There was no judgment in their eyes. Only curiosity. After a long pause, they asked a simple question. If everyone stopped giving you advice today, what would your heart choose tomorrow? The question didn't demand an immediate answer. It invited honesty. Your person closed their eyes for a brief moment, almost as if replaying every memory they had tried so hard to organize. They remembered the moments that brought genuine peace, not excitement that faded overnight, but the quiet kind of comfort that stays with you long after the conversation ends. Then they finally spoke. I don't remember them because I have to. Another pause. I remember them because every important decision somehow leads my thoughts back to the same place. Silence. Not an uncomfortable silence. The kind that appears when everyone realizes they've just heard something completely genuine. Stay a little longer, because what happened next surprised even the person asking the questions. The older relative nodded slowly. "I've lived long enough to recognize the difference between attachment and truth," they said. "Attachment creates fear. Truth creates peace." Those words settled deeply. For the first time, your person realized they weren't holding on to uncertainty. They were holding on to meaning. And meaning is never measured by how loudly the world approves. It's measured by how quietly your soul remains at peace. Think about that for a moment. How often do people mistake outside pressure for wisdom? How often do they confuse rushing forward with genuine progress? Sometimes the strongest decision isn't moving faster. Sometimes it's refusing to abandon something valuable simply because others cannot yet understand it. The evening continued, but something inside your person had permanently shifted. The doubts that once felt overwhelming no longer sounded convincing. The pressure that once seemed impossible to ignore had become background noise. Instead, one quiet realization stood above everything else. If something is truly meant to unfold, forcing a different ending will never bring lasting peace. Those words weren't spoken to impress anyone. They were spoken because they had finally become true. Before leaving the house, the same person who had earlier encouraged them to forget you stopped near the doorway. They looked back with a thoughtful expression. "You know," they admitted softly, "I expected you to change your mind today." Your person smiled. "Maybe I did." The room became still again. But not in the way you expected. Instead of letting go of what mattered, they had let go of the fear of other people's expectations. That was the real change. That was the decision nobody saw coming. And from that very moment, every future conversation about marriage, timing, or moving on would sound completely different, because it would now begin with someone who knew exactly where their heart stood. But the greatest surprise was still waiting. Later that night, when everyone else had fallen asleep and the world had become wonderfully quiet, your person picked up something they hadn't touched in a long time. What they discovered in those silent moments didn't just confirm everything they had spoken earlier. It revealed one hidden truth they had never shared with anyone before. And that truth would become the beginning of a chapter that neither of you could have imagined. Wait until the next part, because the story is about to reveal the one realization that changes everything. A strange kind of peace filled the night. The kind that only appears after someone finally stops running from what they truly feel. Yet peace has an interesting habit. It often uncovers truths that have been quietly waiting beneath the surface all along. Stay until the end of this chapter, because what your person discovered that night wasn't something anyone else could have predicted. The house had fallen completely silent. The conversations were over. The advice had ended. The opinions had faded into the background. For the first time that entire day, your person was finally alone with their own thoughts. They walked toward a small drawer they hadn't opened in months. Not because they expected to find answers there, but because something inside urged them to look one more time. Inside were simple reminders of different seasons of life. Old notes. A few photographs. A forgotten bookmark. Nothing extraordinary. Or so it seemed. As they looked through those quiet memories, they realized something remarkable. None of the meaningful moments had been planned. The strongest memories had arrived unexpectedly. The conversations that mattered most had happened naturally. The moments that brought genuine hope had never been forced. That realization changed everything. Because suddenly they understood that the connection they had been asked to forget wasn't built on pressure. It had grown through authenticity. Have you ever noticed that the most valuable things in life rarely demand attention? They simply remain present, patiently waiting until the heart is ready to recognize their worth. Your person smiled to themselves. Not because every question had been answered, but because they no longer needed every answer before believing in what felt real. Stay a little longer, because the next discovery became impossible to ignore. As midnight approached, their phone quietly lit up. No dramatic message. No unexpected confession. Just an ordinary notification. Yet somehow that tiny moment reminded them of something far more important. Life doesn't always speak through extraordinary events. Sometimes it whispers through perfect timing. They looked out the window and thought back to everything that had happened earlier that day. The pressure. The advice. The suggestion to forget you and begin a different future. Then they asked themselves one final question. If I truly walked away today, would I feel relief? The answer arrived instantly. No. Not because of fear. Not because of loneliness. Because walking away would mean ignoring the deepest truth they had finally accepted. That single realization became stronger than every opinion they had heard. Before the night ended, they quietly wrote a few words. Not for anyone else to read, but as a promise to themselves. Never let temporary pressure decide a permanent direction. Those words stayed on the page. But their meaning settled in the heart. If you've made it this far, thank you for sharing this journey. If this story speaks to something you've experienced, consider sharing it with someone who may need hope today. And if you enjoy thoughtful stories about destiny, growth, and meaningful connections, subscribing helps you continue this journey with us. As dawn slowly approached, your person felt lighter than they had in a long time. Nothing around them had changed. Yet everything inside them had. They were no longer searching for permission to trust what they already knew. They had found quiet confidence. And confidence has a remarkable way of changing the future before the future even arrives. But the story isn't over. Because within the next few days, someone completely unexpected would approach your person with information they never saw coming. It wasn't gossip. It wasn't coincidence. It was a conversation that would connect every unanswered question from this night, and reveal why this chapter had unfolded exactly when it did. What they hear next will challenge everything they once believed, and you'll understand why this unexpected journey was only the beginning. A new morning arrived, but this wasn't just another sunrise. It carried the quiet weight of unfinished answers. Sometimes the universe doesn't reveal everything at once. Instead, it places one final piece exactly where it belongs, allowing every previous moment to suddenly make sense. Don't rush ahead. The next few moments reveal why everything your person experienced was leading toward this conversation. 2 days passed. Life appeared normal on the outside. Work continued. People smiled. Conversations came and went. Yet beneath the surface, your person's heart had become unusually calm. They no longer felt the pressure to explain themselves to everyone around them. The need for approval had quietly disappeared. Then, without warning, someone approached them. It wasn't the person who had encouraged them to move on. It wasn't a family member. It was an old friend who had been watching everything from a distance. After exchanging a few ordinary words, the friend suddenly said something unexpected. "I've wanted to tell you this for a long time, but I wasn't sure if the moment was right." Your person looked surprised. "What is it?" The friend smiled gently. Every time someone mentioned forgetting them, your expression never changed. It wasn't stubbornness. It wasn't denial. It looked like certainty. And I realized something: people only remain that peaceful when they're protecting something that truly matters. Those words settled deeply. Not because they revealed something new. Because they confirmed what your person had finally accepted within themselves. Sometimes the greatest confirmation doesn't come from signs. It comes from someone quietly recognizing the truth you've already begun to live. Pause here for just a second. How often do we search everywhere for certainty while overlooking the quiet confidence already growing inside us? Your person finally understood that real clarity doesn't shout. It whispers. And once you hear it, no outside noise sounds quite the same again. As they continued walking, another realization appeared. The people who had once insisted they should move on had stopped trying to convince them. Not because they had lost the argument. Because they had begun to respect the peace your person carried. Peace has a remarkable influence. It changes conversations without raising its voice. It changes